Victoria had always believed that life could be orderly, predictable, and safe. The house she shared with Elias, her husband of over a decade, and their 18-year-old son, Caleb, was more than just a home. It was a fortress of comfort, a space where laughter and stability mingled in perfect balance. Every corner of the house held memories. Caleb's first steps by the staircase, the cozy breakfast nook where Elias and Victoria spent countless mornings talking about their plans, and the backyard garden that Victoria had painstakingly nurtured. Life was calm, almost idyllic, and the rhythm of their days had settled into a comfortable routine. But when the moving truck arrived next door, bringing a family that was at first just a blur of boxes and strangers, the balance was immediately disrupted. Seraphina, Adrian, and their 20-year-old son, Tristan, emerged with all the energy of a new, chaotic storm. Victoria watched them from the window as the movers carried in furniture, her sense of curiosity tinged with unease. There was something about Seraphina, the way she laughed freely, how her dark eyes seemed to study the world with playful mischief, that immediately put Victoria on edge, though she could not yet understand why. Elias, meanwhile, felt an unfamiliar stir of anticipation. A polite introduction had barely ended before he realized that every small gesture from Seraphina, a casual touch on the arm, a glance that lingered too long, sent a current of something he had not felt in years running through him. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but undeniably present. The quiet life he had cherished was being pulled towards something dangerous, thrilling, and entirely forbidden. Victoria, immersed in unpacking and arranging their home, noticed only fragments. A look, a smile exchanged at the gate, a conversation lingering past what seemed necessary. Yet she dismissed them as trivial neighborly niceties, unaware that the real storm had already begun, invisible but brewing. As the days passed, the presence of the new neighbors became more pronounced, not just physically but emotionally. Elias felt a growing tension in his chest every time he caught sight of Seraphina. She walked with a grace that seemed effortless, yet every step was calculated, almost predatory, to captivate attention without ever seeming overt. Her laughter, light and musical, seemed to echo in his mind long after the conversation ended, and her eyes always appeared to find him, even across the distance of lawns and fences. Victoria, meanwhile, began to notice subtle changes. Elias no longer joined her for the quiet morning coffee in the sunroom as often. When he did, his mind seemed elsewhere, distracted by thoughts he would not share. The phone in his pocket buzzed more frequently, and sometimes he would answer it with a tone sharper than necessary, quickly excusing himself. Caleb, perceptive despite his youth, observed the faint tension and avoided mentioning it, perhaps fearing to provoke conflict. Elias tried to rationalize his growing obsession. "It's harmless," he told himself. "She's just a neighbor, nothing more." But rational thought could not compete with the surge of emotions that Seraphina elicited. Each glance, each accidental brush of hands, each whisper meant to seem innocent sent his mind spiraling into fantasies he would never admit aloud. The thrill of secrecy, the dangerous allure of something forbidden, began to dominate his days. Seraphina noticed. Of course she did. Her smiles became more knowing, her pauses more suggestive. She had an uncanny awareness of the emotional currents swirling around her and fed on them, a predator savoring the uncertainty and desire she inspired. She left trails of temptation, subtle enough to avoid outright scandal, yet powerful enough to entice and destabilize. Elias found himself trapped, drawn deeper into a storm he knew could destroy everything he held dear. It was a warm evening when the invisible barrier between curiosity and transgression finally cracked. A neighborhood gathering, a casual barbecue with families milling about, ended with Elias and Seraphina stepping onto the balcony together for a moment of solitude.
If this story hits you, you can support the channel with a quick hype.
The conversation began innocuously enough, observations about the sunset, casual remarks about their children's laughter. But the air was charged with an unspoken electricity, a current of forbidden emotion neither fully acknowledged yet both felt. Seraphina leaned slightly closer, her perfume mingling with the evening air, a subtle signal that she was testing limits. Elias felt his pulse quicken, a cocktail of guilt and exhilaration surging through him. Every instinct screamed to resist, but desire was relentless. Their hands brushed, a fleeting contact that seemed to linger far longer than reality permitted. Eyes met with a tension that words could not capture, an intimate understanding that both thrilled and terrified. The first kiss, tentative and almost shy, became a gateway. It was not just a physical act, but a collision of longing, fantasy, and the dangerous taste of rebellion. Elias' mind wrestled with morality, with loyalty, with love for Victoria, but his heart betrayed him at every turn. In that moment, the neat world he had curated for years began to unravel, thread by thread, under the weight of uncontainable desire. Victoria began sensing the change long before words were spoken. The subtle shift in Elias' behavior became impossible to ignore: a distracted look, a sudden defensiveness when Seraphina was mentioned, a lingering hesitance in speech. Caleb, sharp-eyed and sensitive, noticed the tension growing like a shadow creeping across the walls of their home. Conversations became cautious, pauses loaded with unspoken questions, and even the once familiar spaces of the house felt charged with uncertainty. Elias, aware of the scrutiny but unable to break free from Seraphina's pull, felt trapped in a dual existence. At home, he attempted normalcy, but every interaction was weighted, every smile forced, every glance calculated. The strain grew with each passing day, a subtle, ever-tightening web that threatened to expose everything. Seraphina's subtle manipulations ensured that he could not step back. She had become both the catalyst and the trap, a constant presence in his mind, compelling him further into transgression. Victoria's instincts, honed over years of subtle observation and emotional intelligence, finally sounded the alarm. Something was wrong, and she could feel it in her bones. The first pangs of suspicion were accompanied by a quiet fury, an awareness that someone had begun to intrude upon the sanctity of her home, her marriage, her family. The betrayal, though not yet fully visible, had planted a seed of vengeance within her, a determination to reclaim control and exact justice in a way that would leave an indelible mark. At the same time, Seraphina's influence over Elias had intensified. Every stolen glance, every subtle touch, every whisper had created a storm of desire and guilt. Elias was caught in the eye of the hurricane, unable to discern what was right and what was impossible to resist. The tension between the hidden and the inevitable, the moral and the seductive, set the stage for a sequence of events that would soon engulf both families. Secrets were beginning to accumulate, choices were being made that could not be undone, and the delicate balance of trust, love, and loyalty was preparing to collapse under the weight of human desire. The night was thick with tension as Elias found himself once again alone with Seraphina in the dimly lit study of her new home. The casual conversation quickly melted into confessions of desires, unspoken frustrations, and a dangerous attraction that neither could resist. Each word she spoke seemed to bypass his rationality, striking directly at the impulses he had long tried to suppress. Elias' mind raced with guilt, imagining Victoria at home, her trust intact, unaware of the emotional storm unraveling before him. But the thrill of forbidden connection outweighed conscience. Every subtle touch, every shared glance was electric, and as the hours passed, boundaries disintegrated. The first act of betrayal, though small and almost unnoticeable to the outside world, marked the beginning of a chain reaction that would consume both families. Caleb at home sensed the shift in his father's demeanor. A flicker of unease crossed his mind, but he was too young to piece together the complexity of adult desire and deception. Still, something in the air had changed. The laughter that once filled the house seemed muted, the warmth of shared dinners slightly hollowed. The very walls seemed to echo with tension that Caleb could not yet articulate. Victoria's intuition, sharp and relentless, began piecing together the fragments she had noticed over the past weeks. A phone call unanswered, a lingering look, a sudden defensiveness. These seemingly small occurrences coalesced into a terrifying truth she was only beginning to comprehend. Fueled by a mixture of hurt, betrayal, and determination, Victoria began observing Elias more closely. Every move he made was analyzed, every excuse weighed against the truth she feared. At the same time, Seraphina, aware of the scrutiny, intensified her allure, carefully manipulating situations to keep Elias ensnared. The tension between desire and guilt reached a fever pitch, creating a palpable undercurrent that threatened to explode. Caleb, growing increasingly perceptive, could no longer ignore the change. He began noticing whispered conversations, half-hidden smiles, and the subtle yet telling signs of a family in emotional crisis. The innocence of youth collided with the harsh realities of adult deceit, setting the stage for an inevitable confrontation that would ripple through both households. The intimate encounters between Elias and Seraphina became more daring, each meeting laden with tension, risk, and the intoxicating sense of danger. Their stolen moments, hidden from the eyes of Victoria and the world, created a labyrinth of secrecy that neither could navigate without emotional damage. Victoria, meanwhile, started formulating her own plan. She would not remain a passive observer while her marriage crumbled. Her mind, once focused on routine and domestic harmony, was now consumed by strategy, observation, and the faint, dangerous whisper of vengeance. Every subtle infraction, every secretive glance, fed her growing determination to reclaim control and exact justice in a way that would resonate beyond the immediate betrayal. Adrian, oblivious to the emotional chaos brewing next door, noticed Victoria's increasing vigilance, sensing the tension that hovered in the air but unable to comprehend the underlying causes. Tristan, the 20-year-old son, absorbed the atmosphere, unaware that the emotional storms around him would soon pull him into conflict, forcing decisions no young man should ever face. Tensions reached a critical point when Victoria, unable to ignore the mounting evidence, confronted Elias with a piercing question about his whereabouts and the nature of his interactions with Seraphina. The confrontation was not loud or dramatic at first, but the intensity in Victoria's eyes, the controlled fury behind her words, made it clear that nothing could remain hidden any longer. Elias, caught between desire and guilt, faltered. The duality of his emotions, love for Victoria, lust for Seraphina, clashed violently, creating a mental and emotional turmoil that threatened to spill into catastrophe. Words were exchanged, emotions flared, and the first irreversible cracks in the household's foundation became visible. Caleb, witnessing the tension, felt the undercurrent of adult conflict creeping into his life, a shadow that could not be ignored. Victoria's resolve solidified. The betrayal had ignited a spark of vengeance that she could no longer suppress. She began subtly testing boundaries, observing both Elias and Seraphina, and plotting a path to reclaim power in a world where her trust had been violated.
If you've ever felt this kind of pain, don't walk through it alone. Hit subscribe and stay with us. More real stories are coming.